I am going to stop sharing and introduce our renowned authors and presenters for tonight, Andy Mckinnon and Chem Luther. And I'm sorry that we can't all be gathering in person. I saw Andy speak about mushrooms once and he was wearing are you wearing your mushroom pants?
I'm not. I'm not, because I'm just from the waist up, really. I am wearing my mushroom underpants, but not my mushroom.
We're not going to go there, okay?
No.
But yeah, even like yeah, I remember you stood up on some table to show off your mushroom pants, not underpants.
They're very handsome.
You see what I go through?
I know, Cam. I'm so sorry.
A little pity here, please.
So I am going to read you Chem and Andy's bios. So Andy Mckinnon's recent research interests include the ecology of BC's ectomycorrhizal fungal species. He was lead BC scientist for Environment Canada's 2017 ranking of the province's threatened and endangered fungal species. Andy has taught rainforest ecology field courses in Bamfield and Tofino for the University of Victoria and in Haida Gwaii for UBC. He has also taught mushroom identification courses in Tofino for the Rainforest Education Society and in Victoria. He is co-author of 6 best-selling books about plants of Western North America and co-author of the Royal BC Museum's Handbook. This is the new book that we're going to be hearing about today, Mushrooms of British Columbia. And he is past president of the South Vancouver Island Mycological Society. And it doesn't say anything here about your mushroom clothing, but maybe you can add that to the next time. And then Chem Luther is a naturalist and writer. He grew up in the Nebraska Sandhills, studied at Cornell, the University of Chicago, and the University of Toronto, and taught at Eastern Mennonite University, Sheridan College at York University, and the University of Toronto. When he moved from a home on Ontario's Grand River to the southern tip of Vancouver Island in 2004, he developed an abiding passion to know the mushrooms of Western North America. Besides Mushrooms of British Columbia, Chem is the author of 6 books, including Boundary Layer, highly recommended, Exploring the Genius Between Worlds. So that has a lot about mosses and the...
No reference to Andy.
And Chem has also been secretary and speaker coordinator of the South Vancouver Island Mycological Society. And they both live in Metchosin and co-founded the Metchosin Biodiversity Project. I'll put the link to that in the chat, metchosinbiodiversity.com. And they're both enthusiastic participants, speakers, and field trip leaders for various mushroom festivals in southwestern BC each autumn. And another plug for the Metchosin Biodiversity Project, in addition to doing bio blitzes, and I'm sure many other activities, they put together these species ID cards, which are great for as a field guide, but also for educators. So they've got lots of information on the back, how to find them, where to look for them, interesting notes about them. So I don't know how many cards there are. There's several dozen. So they're really beautiful photographs too from the BioBlitz. And before I hand it over, I'll just see if anyone else has any, I forgot to ask if anyone else has any announcements, other things happening before we pass the torch, so to speak. If you have any anything that you wanted to share about upcoming events or anything like that, please unmute and share, or you can always put it in the chat as well. All right. Oh, Sylvia, I think wants to share something. She's unmuting.
There. Hi,
Hi,
Stephanie.
Sylvia.
Hi, how are you? Nice to see you.
Thank you.
Just wanted to mention that the Native Plant Study Group is having Dr. Tara Martin from UBC going to be talking about our biodiversity, looking at Sydney Island and what they're doing there to encourage the biodiversity by managing the deer population. So she's going to be talking again to us. This will be the second time, and it'll be on the 21st of October at 7 o'clock. Victoria, and so just get hold of, Google up Native Plant Study Group, and you'll Native Plant Study Group or npsg.ca for the
Great.
information. Thanks,
Okay.
Stephanie.
Thank you. Anybody else? I think everyone's very anxious to hear your talk, so I'm going to pass it over to you. So feel free to start screen sharing whenever you're ready.
I'm ready to share. Are you, Chem?
Yep, let's go.
All right. And just to follow up on Sylvia's invitation, let's see here. I think this is the one we want here. Tara Martin's terrific. So that would be a fun presentation to take in. And let's see here. How's that?
Looks great.
Looks good.
You see that?
Yep.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming out tonight. We really appreciate it, and of course we're delighted and honored to have been invited by the Natural History Society to join you this evening. Kim and I have a presentation that might last about 45 minutes or so, and we want to leave plenty of time for questions or discussion afterwards. So let's get going. This is a presentation about the BC's new mushroom book, Mushrooms of British Columbia. If you haven't got a copy yet and you want to get one, apparently the museum is down to their last 28 copies, and that's for the province. So if you want to get one, I would suggest getting one sooner, because you won't be able to get one later. And given supply chain backups and everything, they're not going to be able to reprint them till February. But anyway, there you go. Mushrooms of British Columbia. I have spent a lot of time with a number of people on the call looking at plants, and the field guides that I've contributed to before have been about plants. But my master's in 1982 was in fungi, a group of the ecology of a group of microfungi that live in streams in British Columbia, not mushrooms. But it's hard to work on fungi and not succumb to the allure of the fabulous fleshy fructifications that we call mushrooms. And so this is, I did my degree from 1979 to 1982 in one of the old World War II Army huts in the UBC campus. For those who have never seen me with dark hair, that's actually me on the top right. And for those who have never seen Paul Kruger, the famous Vancouver mushroom guru, without a beard, that's me and Paul in our Piltzkrieg across British Columbia in 1981, I think, 1979 to so it's, and then I worked for many years more with plants and ecosystems than with my beloved fungi. So it's just so wonderful in the last 15 years to come back and bring more of a focus to fungi. 1979 to 1982 were also coincidentally the 3 years when it was not illegal to possess magic mushrooms in British Columbia. It's entirely coincidence that those happen to be the same 3 years, but it was a very fuzzy time indeed on the UBC campus. As our excellent host, Stephanie, has mentioned, Chem and I were two of the founding members of the Mckinnon BioBlitz some years ago, but we both have a deep and abiding love for fungi. So it wasn't too many years until the Mckinnon Biodiversity Project convened its first MycoBlitz. And except for last year, when so much got canceled. We've had myco blitzes each year in Metchosin, and so have a better idea than most communities in Western Canada of the fungal diversity that we find in Metchosin. So here's just a few pictures from the myco blitz with little Shiloh on the bottom right there, exploring my beard for fungi. Successfully, I think, probably. But we're here tonight to talk about the mushroom guide. Both Kim and I were happy, and he'll talk a bit more about this, that the Royal British Columbia Museum agreed to publish a mushroom guide for British Columbia. Kim, am I supposed to have handed over to you at this point?
No, you're doing fine. Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. I was mentioning to some of the people here earlier that for the last dozen years or more, from mid-September to mid-November, every weekend and an increasing number of weekdays is a different mushroom festival or mushroom course somewhere in Western North America. We're not doing any in the United States this year for that obvious reason. Last weekend was Tofino and Ucluelet. The weekend before was Cumberland. The weekend before was Bamfield, and so on and so forth. And one of the things that we encounter each year is people asking, what's a good beginner's mushroom guide for British Columbia? And Chem will talk a bit more about this later, but for different reasons, none of the guides that were publicly available could be recommended without a caveat, without yes, that's a good guide, except for. And I think we grew tired of waiting for someone to produce a guide to BC mushrooms and realized that if somebody was going to do it, well, perhaps we would have to step up. The Royal BC Museum is a great organization, of course, and a great organization to publish the new mushroom guide, because they have published a couple of guides to British Columbia's mushrooms. George Hardy's 1946 classic on the left there with the beautiful illustrations in it, a guide of about 90 pages containing 50 species. And on the right, the Guide to Common Mushrooms of British Columbia by Robert Bandoni and Adam Szczawinski, first published in '64 and last revised in 1976, about 170 pages long and about 150 mushrooms. Dr. Bandoni was my master's supervisor when I was at UBC. And I believe that was the first Royal BC Museum handbook to feature color photographs in its later editions, at least. Anyway, it was very exciting for somebody who actually grew up with a lot of these guides, who actually learned an awful lot of his botany from these guides, to actually get a chance to contribute to the series. The new guide has 500 pages and includes about 350 mushroom species as main entries. So it's considerably larger than either of the ones that came before. And there are an additional 800 species profiled in the main entries, which is still a fairly small percentage of BC's mushrooms, but we'll get to that in a sec here. So in this talk, Chem and I are going to tag team. We'll talk about making the book. We'll cover a bunch of photographs in two sections. So even if the rest of the talk is not to your liking, we've included an awful lot of eye candy to show you the beauty and diversity in kingdom fungi. We'll talk a bit about box essays and fun facts, about interacting with current research. Then we'll look at a second batch of photos, this time on the non-gilled mushrooms, and finally wrap up. And with that, I'll hand it over to Chem.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Okay, this is a bit about the making of the book, how it came about. And tonight we'll be focusing on the book, but we'll also be using it as a gateway to look into the larger world of mushrooms in BC. So there's more here than just a book talk, if you want. So next slide. The actual work on the new guide occupied about 4 years, from 2017 to 21. But the concept of the book is really quite a bit older. As early as 1983, not long after those pictures you saw, Andy and Paul Kroger had drawn up an initial prospectus for the book. In the last 2 decades, almost every discussion of print resources for BC mushrooms has included some kind of lament that we didn't have a BC specific book. We were using books from Washington and other places. And while they had some coverage of BC, they didn't have complete coverage, and they covered things that weren't in BC. And the value of a field guide, as all of you know who work in any natural history area, increases almost exponentially with the focus of the field guide on the area you're actually looking at. In 2017, both Andy and I were both writers. We found ourselves looking for new writing projects at the same time. And finally, after all of these years, the BC mushroom book popped to the top of the stack. Well, we did a search for suitable publishers, and it became obvious very quickly that the best place was the BC Museum Press, and they agreed with us. And so we signed a contract with them. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
I have to keep somebody there to wake Andy up.
It seems stuck here. Why is this not
Advancing? Okay. Oh, there we go. So not only had the BC Museum Press published the 2 previous museum mushroom guides that Andy mentioned, it's also well known for its extensive series of BC natural history guides.
okay? There's a problem with changing. Okay.
Does it work to use the tab key?
Doesn't seem to, but I can click on them and they'll change. So I think we'll be okay.
So the first task we had was to come up with a list of mushroom species for the book. Which ones were we going to talk about? Ian Gibson, the developer of Mycomatch, and Shannon Birch, a mycologist who was with the Ministry of Environment until recently, and is the author of a checklist, Macrofungus Species of BC. The 2 of them helped us pull together a master list of all the fungi recorded in BC. Ian and Shannon and also Paul Kroger then helped us to whittle the list down. BC, we discovered, has about 3,400 known species of mushrooms. And of course, there's many thousands more that have never been identified. So we could only include a small fraction of these. So we wanted to include the ones that people were most likely to encounter. So to decide which ones to include, we assembled a large number of foray and archive lists, and we checked the species frequencies on these. And also to correct our coastal and southwestern BC bias, both Andy and I work primarily in this area around Vancouver Island. We ran our list by several mycologists who had specific interests in the interior and northern BC species. We finally whittled the list down from 3,400 to 350. In other words, 1 out of every 10 and that we wanted to include as main entries. And as we mentioned, we were able to mention another 800 of these in the text. But even there, even counting those, that's only 1/3 of all the known mushrooms species in BC. We prepared sample pages with photographs and descriptions, and we confirmed with the press that they could accommodate our text and picture requirements.
Chem, if I might leap in just for a sec, just something that is unusual about kingdom fungi and specifically in this case, the mushrooms compared with some of the other groups people are familiar with is just how poorly known our local taxa are. There are 3,400 species of larger macrofungi, say, what we're calling mushrooms here, that are known for the province. If I was to take a guess, I would say there might be 10,000 species in the province. But that would just be a wild ass guess, and it could be more or less than that. So and that's the larger fungi, the ones that we know comparatively well. If you were trying to put an estimate on the number of microscopic fungi in the province, the number would be much larger, but I wouldn't want to try and hazard a guess to how many there might be within an order of magnitude, say.
No, in fact, the guesses as to how many fungi there are in the world range from 5 to 10 million. You birders, a lot of you with the VNHS are birders, right? You don't realize how easy you have it. I mean, what do you have? 300 species of birds, perhaps, and we're working with 3,500 here. It's really a daunting task. In addition to the pictures and descriptions of the 350 species, we also wanted to include about 24 feature essays specifically on BC mycology. What's happening in mushrooms around BC? We plan to include identification keys as well, but eventually we had to drop this because we realized that would cost us about 50 species descriptions. And there is in fact, a tendency of beginners books in mushrooms nowadays not to include keys. So we left those off. Next slide. To make the book more accessible, we gave special attention to vocabulary. Those who want to participate fully in research communities, as many of you know, must master a fairly large technical vocabulary, and certainly we have that with mushrooms. But these technical vocabularies create high bars for beginners. Like, what do mushroom newbies make of the words like annulus, lacanose, scorbiculate, adnate, and fusoid? So wherever possible in this book, we replace technical terms with more transparent phrases. With the book mapped out, we started to write, and in the course of generating about 150,000 words about BC mushrooms, we consulted 500 journal articles, many book and mushroom guides, and innumerable web pages. To make,
Sorry, I had skipped one there. We're okay now.
Okay.
That was the last one.
Oh, okay, all right.
And the next one is here.
Okay, so as the different sections of the new mushroom book were generated, they were sent out to experts in the various groups for comments and corrections. Several people looked at the entire text. Again, Paul Kruger kindly reviewed both the text and our picture choices. In parallel with the writing task, we began to search for about 400 photos to include in the book. Andy and I are not photographers. We take photographs, but we really lack maybe the aesthetic side of this. And but a lot of people are really into this, and we contacted people we knew to be good photographers from all over Western Canada and the US Pacific Northwest, and asked them if they would submit to us their pictures for consideration for use in the book. And we received 15,000 candidate photos from about 100 photographers. Picking out the best photos for each species was one of the most difficult tasks of the book. For most of the photos, we sought images that illustrated important features that were highlighted in our descriptions, but a few of the photos we selected simply because they were just so beautiful. For example, here we see James Holco's white marasmus picture. For some sections of the book, especially the introduction, line drawings were more appropriate than photographs. And Dr. Kara Gibson, who is with us tonight, and is the director of the Swan Lake Center, provided us with a set of about 30 amazing drawings that we included in the book. Next.
I was just pausing for a second so people might admire the drawings.
Yeah. Finally, in June 2020, we submitted to the BC Museum our photographs and text, and I had my wife come in when we were ready to send it and take a picture of me hitting the enter key that actually sent it to the museum. But that wasn't the end of it. That was over a year ago. That just began the long task of book layout, cover design, copy editing, fact checking, proofreading, indexing. A large production team was ably coordinated by Eve Rickard, the editor and publisher at BC Museum Press. The formal publication of the book happened in September. An ebook came out at the same time. Mail copies, for those who are interested, can be ordered through the museum and other print book outlets such as Amazon and Chapters. And it is available in bookstores throughout BC. Okay, over to you, Andy.
So we have a couple of sections in tonight's presentation where all you have to do is sit back and enjoy the photos of the fungi. And these are some of our favorite photos by a variety of different photographers.
And they're all photos that are in the book.
Mm-hmm. And they're divided up into those that are photos of gilled and veined mushrooms in this first section here. And then we'll have a section for the non-gilled mushrooms later on in the presentation. So as Chem mentioned, he and I both have a few photos in the book, but most of the photos were taken by people with some serious photography skills, more than 60 photographers, I think, or there were as many as 70, Chem?
Oh, there were over 70 in the end.
Yeah, more than 70 photographers. So here are a few of their photos. Here's the lovely woolly ink cap doing what the ink caps do best, which is dissolving into black liquid as the spores are dispersed. Here's a couple of photos that were sent to us that we chose not to include. And now for some of the ones that we did include. Oh, I'm sorry. Here we go. I'm being incognito here. Maybe until that last slide was passed. Here is a lovely photo by one of our favorite photographers, Rich Mabley, who lives here on southern Vancouver Island. And as I look at these photographs each time, particularly as I'm putting them up on a screen here, I try to imagine what the photographer must have done to get these photos. There's an awful lot of time on your belly and some pretty wet places involved in taking some of these beautiful photos. The woolly mink, the woolly milk cap by Christian Schwartz. Christian is one of the co-authors of the exceptional new book on the mushrooms of the redwood forests of California, and just a lovely photo showing the woolly or bearded edge of the cap. Rich Mabley again with his parrot waxy cap. Those who know these mushrooms and their names may notice some unfamiliar names here. So some of the scientific names that appear in our book will be the first time those names have appeared in any of our local mushroom books. The names are changing very quickly for reasons that Chem will get into a bit later. So some may know the parrot waxy cap as Hygrophorus or Hygrocebi citicinus, now in the genus Gliophorus, but suitably gooey and glorious, whatever genus it happens to be in. This beautiful pair of sheathed powder caps, photographed by Tyson Ehlers, who was our West Kootenays reviewer too, in an attempt to correct that coastal bias that Chem mentioned and make sure that our timing and habitat for a lot of these mushrooms was correct for southeastern British Columbia.
This always looks to me like a couple of ladies from the 1920s, society ladies sitting and having tea with each other.
You can see how
Big hats.
the partial veil, which would have covered the gills and protected the developing basidia on the gills, has left its ring on the stem, and very handsome fiber remains on the margins of the cap. And sometimes you can look at a photo and you just know how gooey, slimy something is, like this yellow waxy cap photo by Steve Ness. Thank you, Steve. And another truly slimy mushroom, the dripping slime cap. And this is a photo, we have a number of photos by Kit Skates Barnhart, who died many years ago. And Michael Bugh helped us track down her collection of extraordinary photos from the Pacific Northwest. Where we had good photos from British Columbia, we used them. Where we had better photos from adjacent jurisdictions like Washington State, say, or Montana, then we sometimes used those. And this is from the US Pacific Northwest. The very handsome lilac gilled umbrella photo by Sava Kirstik. We'll see a couple of his photos later on. And the one photo in the book that was not taken from BC or adjacent jurisdictions. And this is the grass green russula, which was shot in Finland. And we thought it would be okay to use this, both because we didn't have a good photo of any of the grass green russulas from this part of the world, and also because the genetic signature of the mushroom in this photo matched perfectly the genetic signature of Russula graminea collected in British Columbia. This is one of the few examples, perhaps it's the example, of a photo in our book that's a mushroom photo that's not a mushroom. This is actually the fruiting body of a lichen whose lead fungal partner is a basidiomycete. And so when the fungus partner in the lichen reproduces, the reproductive structures are little tiny mushrooms. But this is the fruiting body of a lichen, and if you look carefully near the bottom of these little tiny mushrooms, this is just a few centimeters high, you'll oftentimes find the little green balls of the photobiont, the algal partner in the lichen symbiosis. The slippery mycena, again by Sava Kirstik. And you don't have to look too closely to see how slippery that mushroom would be. There's nothing quite as delightful as backlit slime, I think. And this is a mushroom that's so slimy, it's actually very difficult to pick up. Keeps falling out from between your fingers, and I think Sava captured that beautifully there. One of our favorite edible mushrooms, the Prince, Agaricus augustus, and a photo that looks like it would transfer very nicely to my fry pan at breakfast, I think. The yellow-gilled Jim, Gymnopolis luteifolius, by Caleb Brown. And here is a picture where Caleb got down so low that he was actually below the mushroom when he took this photo. So you get a nice version of the yellow gills of the yellow-gilled Jim. Scott Redhead, one of Canada's top mushroom experts, has this lovely photo of Kaufman's root shank, Phaeocolybia kaufmanii, a mushroom that in British Columbia is restricted almost entirely to old growth forests as habitat. just a stunning photo by Richard Morrison, who also took the cover photo on the book of the bleeding Mycena. He, in this case, Rosy Gomphidius. I don't think I've ever seen Rosy Gomphidius quite that clean and quite that bright, but it usually has a bunch of stuff on the caps. He may have spent a bit of time sweeping off all the needles and things like that, but it's a very nice shot and shows the yellowing at the bottom, the widely spaced gills. The vermilion waxy cap, Rich Mabley gave us a lot of just gorgeous shots of little wee tiny mushrooms. And this might be 5 or 6 centimeters in height. Well, you can judge by the bryophytes that are growing around it, the size of the mushroom involved in this photo. The blue-green Stropharia, the photo by Taylor Lockwood, really one of the world's best known fungal photographers. And now back to Chem to talk about box essays and fun facts.
Okay, I think this is still you, Randy.
I think people have had enough of me. It must be time for you.
I didn't want to say that, but yeah. Okay, well, I'll do this. Let's go ahead. Next slide. The mushroom descriptions and pictures speak to only a part of the range of all mycological activity that's going on in BC. So to represent the larger picture of the many ways that people interact with mushrooms in our province, we reserved about 10% of the space in the book for what we call box essays. And these are just fun cameos. They're 2-page spreads, and they cover the many meanings and uses of mushrooms in BC. In the book, you'll find box essays on a variety of topics. Here they are listed. I won't list them all. I won't read them all, but just noting a few of them. There's one there on fairy rings. I will look in more detail in a moment. Here's a wonderful picture of Bob Brett's son finding his first pine mushroom, and we included this as a full-page photo in the book. Next slide. BC has played a world-recognized role in popularizing magic mushrooms. But we really were at the very beginning of the whole magic mushroom movement, and our box essay in the book reviews this role. This is the wavy cap, Psilocybe cyanescens.
Whoa. Oh, no.
There we go. This is Paul Marcano. This is a field near Tsawwassen ferry terminal, and Paul and his buddies were out picking Psilocybe liberty cap, Psilocybe semilanceata, that day. I think this picture sort of encapsulates what magic mushrooms meant to people back in the 70s. Next slide. The essay in the book on medicinal mushrooms discusses the toolkit of the 5,000-year-old Otzi the Iceman. He carried with him 2 different kinds of mushrooms, and one of them was there were a pair of them of this one. They were 2 birch conchs, Fomitopsis betulina, and you can see down to the lower right a picture of what they look like when they're fresh. And he carried these with him, and we think that he was probably carrying them for medicinal purposes. Either that, or he was headed over to the Alps to find somebody who could identify the mushroom for him. The 2 theories. Next slide. Dyeing mushrooms, dyeing fabrics with mushrooms has become an important part of the BC mushroom scene. Quite a number of people we know have gotten interested in this, and you can produce an amazing array of artisanal dyes with mushrooms. One essay is devoted to this. This is a picture of Elisa Allen, and all of these bolts of wool that you see there, all of these twists are all dyed with with different mushrooms. It's amazing what you can do. Next slide. In the box essay on zombie ants and other horrors, as Andy mentioned, we take a walk on the scary side of BC mushrooms. The Cordyceps mushrooms, and they grow around the world, are actually parasites on other organisms, and most of the cordyceps are parasites on insects. And what they do is they infect the insect and sort of take over the insect's nervous system, and they make the insect do not what the insect wants to do, but what the mushroom wants it to do, to carry the mushroom to a place where it can spread its seeds. So it forces the insect to do that, and then when it arrives there, it locks the insects into place and kills the insect and fruits out of the body of the insect. In this case, this is the tin-lined June beetle, and those two things at the end that look maybe like legs coming out, those are actually the fruiting bodies of the mushroom of the Cordyceps mushroom that parasitized it and killed it. And all along the Tofino Beach, you can find at certain seasons of the year these killed carcasses of the tin-lined June beetles with the mushroom bodies coming out. Next slide.
Some people find this whole concept horrifying, but some others find it more amusing, I think.
Here's the people who provided the pictures. Megan and Daniela were there at Tofino Beach, and they took a number of interesting pictures and sent them to us, trying to show the fun side of the zombie ants. Whoops, Andy, we just got a green screen here.
Uh-oh.
Okay, now we're back. No, we're partly back. Try going to the next slide and backing up, maybe.
We'll do that.
There we are. Okay, so miles and miles of dry text, even with great photographs, can get a little tedious. So we lightened the mood of the mushrooms of British Columbia by including some stories, quips, and factoids. They're scattered all through the book, like what computer science people call Easter eggs. And we'd like to thank now BC Museum Press for letting these through. As Andy wrote these things, we kept saying, no, they're not going to let this through. But they did let us express our humor. They're not marked in the text. We just left them there for readers to enjoy. And when you read through the book or parts of it, you'll find these. What are you looking for? Next slide. As you read, watch for a cameo appearance by Sasquatch, the mycologist who needs a name shave, a mushroom that ends like a rainbow in a pot of gold, the winner of the world's ugliest mushroom award, and Aunt Eddie's quest to save the morals of housemaids by destroying certain kinds of phallic mushrooms, Arthur Conan Doyle's foul pustules, and a record of the only professional mycologist to die from mushroom poisoning. Okay, so we interacted in this book with current research on mushrooms. Next slide. We ask ourselves in the beginning, when is a good time to write a mushroom guide? And it turns out that for the last 20 years, the answer has always been not yet. Molecular studies of mushroom species have been roiling the taxonomic waters and changing the way we think about mushrooms, and certainly changing the names of mushrooms, how we classify them, the taxonomy. Until the late 1990s, all studies of mushroom taxonomy were based mostly on morphology, the gross morphology or the microscopic morphology, with input from a few mating studies and chemical analyses. But today, in contrast, it is probably not possible to publish a major taxonomic study of mushrooms without also doing DNA analysis. Producing a mushroom guide that makes use of all this current research means that there will be a lot of name changes and that the guide will quickly fall out of date. And it also means that some mushrooms can't be pegged to the exact species. When space allowed, we tried to call attention to the state of current research in our comments section. And I wrote up, when I was working on this, I wrote up eloquent descriptions of the current research, which Andy duly edited down to one sentence. But it had to be done because only so much of this stuff belongs in a beginner's mushroom guide. But we tried to give some indication of what's happening. Let's take a look, for example, at some recent name changes that are included in the book. The blue chanterelle, which is often listed as Polyozelus multiplex, turns out, based on current research, to be an umbrella concept for at least 5 separate species. Many of our BC blue chanterelles, especially if they're dark blue and they're young and fresh, may in fact be a mushroom that was only described in 2017, Polyozelus atrolazulinus. And this is a picture of it. Next slide. The common BC russulas with red caps, red fleshes on the stem, creamy gills, and yellow spore prints, and peppery tastes have gone by many names. They've been called, in our foray list, they've been called Russula rosacea, Russula sanguinea, sanguinaria. These names, though, they're all European names that have been applied to our mushrooms. And it turns out that what we have in BC is slightly different. A huge genetic study of russulas done by Anna Bazzicallupo and just published in about 4 years ago, revised a lot of what we think about it. And the new name for this species is what we used in the book, Russula rhodocephala. Next slide. We once believed that we had a world-spanning species known as witch's hat, Hygrocebi conica, but it turned out when it was studied to be a group of similar species. And one of them, Hygrocebi singeri, was mainly known from Western North America. So that became the name of choice for our local witch's hat mushroom. But now we think that Hygrocebi singeri is itself a species complex, so more changes may be in store. Next slide. Genetic studies in the 2010s have supported the division of Gliophorus from Hygrophorus. So the parrot waxy cap we saw earlier is now Gliophorus cetaceanus, and the orange-brown waxy cap is Gliophorus latus. Group, we add group in our book to Gliophorus latus and other species when there's some indication that instead of that being a single species, there's actually a group of species hiding under one name. Next slide. The red crack bolite. Andy and I for years knew this as Boletus chrysanteron. It was moved in 2008 to its current home in Xerocamelus. The Xerocamelus chrysanteron group, however, is a European complex, and one of these, Xerocamelus diffractus, which was recently described, is the North American species, and very likely most of what we have here. So we use that name. Next slide. The name Hydnum repandum, the hedgehog, is identified with the European species, and it's probably not even found. We call these things our hedgehogs. We call them Hydnum repandum, it probably isn't even here. One Western North American species, now equated with the name Hydnum washingtonianum, which was first described in the Olympic Mountains in the 1890s, has actually been confirmed in BCA through DNA studies. Other species will probably be documented, but for now, we're calling them Hydnum washingtonianum. Next slide. Our most common BC conch is probably the red-belted conch. And we always call that Fomitopsis panicula. And we now know that this name embraces at least 4 distinct species, 2 of which occur in BC. The conch with the strong colors is now known as Fomitopsis mountsi, named after Irene Mounts, one of our unique early, well, not unique, but one of our early women mycologists. Fomitopsis ocrea, when you find it, has a duller gray color on the surface. Next slide. So here are some other name changes. I'm not going to go through these, but just to show you how tricky this all is. You see the one with the asterisk there? Marasmiellus perinatus. When we put the book together a year ago, that was the new name for this mushroom. It had changed from Gymnophis perinatus, which is what I always called the wood woollyfoot. It had changed to Marasmiellus, and we were just getting used to calling it that. And we now know, well, it's almost certain it's going to belong in another genus. And so the next printing of the book will change this to Polybiopsis perinatus. It's that kind of world. When Noah Siegel published his book on the mushrooms of the redwood forest about 4 years ago, he was going around doing lectures on the book, and he said when he published the book, he started a stopwatch to find out how long it was before one of the names in the book wasn't right. And his book lasted 4 months, and then there was a wrong. Our book didn't even last 1 month. When it was published, it had already changed. Next slide. We committed ourselves in the book to providing common names for each species. And this is quite unusual in a mushroom book. You'll find common names in some of these books, but they won't have all the mushrooms won't have common names. There's a lot of them that simply have none. The British Mycological Society has a long-term project to find English names for all of their fungi, but there's no North American compendium of common names, even though this has been endlessly discussed. So we wanted to provide a name for every species. So we were forced to make up a few names. Common names of mushrooms are often funny, and for good reason. It helps us to remember them. Or who can forget the cowboy's handkerchief for the super slimy Hygrophorus eburneus, the white mushroom, or the stinker for the odorous Tricholoma sulphurium group. So we tried to make some of the fabricated common names funny. The new Russula rhodocephala, for example, we called the red hot Russula. And Hypsigus tessulatus, which had no common name, but it grows on poplar trees. We call it hip hop. Get it? Hip hop? Okay. Leucopaxilis gentianis, you see a picture of it there from head height, looks exactly like a flapjack on a fry pan. So we called it the pancake mushroom. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Chem. So now, again, a chance to sit back and relax and just enjoy some beautiful photos contributed by our generous and talented photographers to the book. So about 40% of the main entries in the book are non-guild fungi. We used a broad concept of mushrooms, which is roughly equivalent to the term macrofungi, that is, fungi that are producing fruiting bodies that are big enough for us to see without a hand lens. We broke them down, as a lot of programs and books do, into clubs, corals, jellies, boletes, tooth, polypores, and so forth. And so here are some pictures from non-guild fungi, starting with the photo that I wanted to have as our cover photo, but the Royal British Columbia Museum disagreed, of Abigail clutching a bear's head, Hericion abiatis. They were afraid that people would think that it was a kid's mushroom book and that adults wouldn't buy it. Anyway, we managed to put Abigail on the back cover, but I was hoping that would be our front cover photo. Boletes are fleshy fungi with pores underneath instead of gills. This is probably the world's most sought after mushroom, the king bolete, or sep, or Steinpilz, or porcini. Beautiful photo by Rich Mabley, classic pair of king boletes. And you can see the beautiful net-like reticulations on the stem that are characteristic of this species. Another bolete, the aspen scaber stalks. Again, Kit Skates Barnhart, a posthumous photograph. The Bear's Head by Daryl Thompson. Better name for this fungus, I think, that's sometimes used is the frozen waterfall, which I think is really what it looks like. one of our more delicious wild mushrooms, and one that oftentimes grows fairly high up in trees. And this photo was taken by probably the tallest photographer that we worked with, Daryl Thompson. The beautiful purple fairy club, Elloclaveria purpurea by Richard Morrison. The flat top candy club, Clavariadelphis truncatus. And this is one of the few mushrooms that people harvest, that foragers will harvest for the table for dessert, because the mushroom is very, very sweet, and biting into the top of this mushroom is very much like reminiscent of biting into a marshmallow in terms of taste and texture. Might be good in s'mores. Anyway, just a thought. The pink-tipped coral, there are lots of different Ramarius species which are damnably difficult to tell apart, requiring excellent compound microscopes, a wide variety of stains, lots of patience, and very complex technical keys. But the woods are oftentimes full of these corals, and I'll show you a picture in a second demonstrating the rainbow of colors that we see with the coral fungi. I mentioned this parasite that we find in Bamfield most years. This is Polypocalydium Capitatum. What you're looking at here is an ascomycete mushroom, which is parasitizing the deer truffle. So if you look at those photos, the round object, the spherical object at the bottom is the deer truffle. It's underground, and the way that we find them is we see growing above ground this parasite that's fruiting out of the deer truffle. So this is a relative of the fungi that parasitize beetles and ants, only in this case it's parasitizing a truffle. The red paint fungus, one of our representatives of fungi that have teeth instead of gills or pores. This is a mushroom that has been used for millennia as a source of red dye. In British Columbia, the western varnished conch, fairly common polypore fungus. Polypore because if you look at the undersurface, there are thousands or tens of thousands of little tiny pores, the inside of which are lined by the spore-producing apparatus of the fungus. This is our closest BC relative to Ganoderma lucidum, the Japanese reishi or Chinese lingqi, a very important mushroom in traditional Chinese medicine. And the conchs of this species are gathered in British Columbia. We don't have good evidence that the same compounds that are valued in the Ganoderma lucidum complex are present in Ganoderma oregonense and related species. And in fact, a bit of evidence that they're not, but that hasn't stopped people from gathering and using this fungus medicinally in British Columbia. The Conifer sulfur shelf, AKA chicken of the woods, which a number of people, probably even a number of people in tonight's presentation have gathered and eaten this mushroom when it's young and fresh. It's tasty, a taste reminiscent of human flesh or fried chicken, which is where chicken of the woods comes from. As it gets old, like so many of us, it becomes tough and bitter.
Did you say a taste reminiscent of human flesh?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, which incidentally tastes like chicken, apparently. I've never eaten chicken. The purple jelly drops, Ascocarini. Lovely photo again by Daryl Thompson, who took the photo of the bear's head earlier on. And will be joining us at Whistler Fungus Among Us this weekend. Very much looking forward to seeing Daryl again. Rich Mabley again with a beautiful photo. This is a mushroom which is usually between 1 and 2 centimeters tall, well, usually closer to 1 centimeter tall. And you get a photo like this that just captures it beautifully. The Hardwood Witch's Butter, Tremella mesenterica, by our good friend Richard Droker from Seattle. You can tell the gelatinous nature of that just from the photo, I think. The Western Giant Puffball, which is known from British Columbia, only from interior British Columbia. I've only ever seen it as far west as the Pemberton Valley, except that it also grows in Metchosin, where Chem and I live. So this is a photo of our next door neighbor holding a giant puffball. This is a delicious mushroom to find, slice into steaks and fry up in your pan for breakfast. Yum, yum. The bowl earth star, Geastrum siccatum, a puffball relative. The eyelash cup. You can see it's called an eyelash because it's got those lovely black hairs all around the edges. Saddle-shaped false morels, Gyromitra infula, and again from the West Kootenays by Tyson Ellers. The fall western white truffle. So British Columbia has dozens of different species of native truffles. Most of them, like the vast majority of mushrooms in British Columbia, edible but not incredible. But there are a few species, the fall and spring western white truffles, for example, which are in the same genus, tuber, as the truffles of commerce from Europe, the Paragord truffle. And these are gathered commercially in Oregon and Washington. There is a big truffle festival in January in Oregon. And that's a good place to go, not only if you want to feast, but if you want to train up your dog as a truffle hound. So you can use them to find these fungi which fruit underground here. And this is a species we found so far only in extreme southwestern British Columbia, but maybe a little bit more widespread than that with Douglas fir. We know comparatively little about the truffles of British Columbia because they fruit underground. So they're a little harder to find unless you have a talented truffle hound. And there's one of the essays in the book features a picture of probably BC's most talented truffle hound, Dexter the pug. We also include some fungi, a small sampling of fungi that catch your eye, but that I don't think most people would call mushrooms. This is an Oregon grape leaf here with the hexagonal spot growing on it. You can see in the bottom right there why it's called the hexagonal spot. It's opening up there. And you can see on the leaf here all of the different colonies. So each of those jigsaw puzzle pieces is a different individual of this species, and the lines that divide them are where the incompatible mating types come into contact with each other. This also grows on salal if you find a salal leaf that looks similar to this. Here's a box of bromeliads that Sava Christic noticed, a box of coral mushrooms that Sava noticed at the end of one mushroom foray. Just showing you the variety of colors and shapes that we find within this group of coral mushrooms. The velvety earth tongue, Trichoglossum. And some bird's nest fungi, in this case, one of the more scenic bird's nests, the fluted bird's nest. We probably have half a dozen common species of bird's nest on southern Vancouver Island here. And you can see inside the nest portion, the little clusters of spores called peridioles, which look for all the world like eggs inside a bird's nest. The water droplets fall into the cups and the eggs are blown out by a splash cup mechanism. Okay. So if you look at the book, at the cover of the book, it's only got the two names on the cover, mine and Chem's. But we wanted to end by reflecting on the fact that it actually takes an awful lot of people to put a guide like this together. We just didn't have enough room on the cover for all the people who were involved. So among other people we would like to thank, as Chem mentioned, he and I know southwestern British Columbia fungi fairly well, and the rest of the province a lot less well. And BC is a very large and very diverse place, and the fungi comparatively little known. So we had Keith Egger and Hugues Massico from University of Northern British Columbia, Dan Durrell for the Southern Interior, Tyson Ellers for the Kootenays, Marty Cranabedder for Northwestern British Columbia, and others, providing us, first of all, with 4A lists and records, and then afterwards having a look at what we'd written to make sure that the distribution and habitat information for the species, even the seasonality of the species, was described properly for their part of British Columbia. The section reviews, I was absolutely astonished when we were dealing with a lot of the difficult genera. We reached out to really the best people on the globe to help us with those sections. And I think with one exception, everybody just said, sure, I'll help out. It was wonderful. And so you can see all of the different people. For example, Chem was mentioning Anna Bazzicallupo, who described that Russula rhodocephala. And we asked Anna if she would have a look at our Russula section, and she just said, sure. The same with just about everybody we contacted, very generous individuals. We had people we could go to with sticky taxonomic questions. We had people who reviewed all or some of our essays. For example, Nancy Turner agreed to review our essay on fungi and First Nations. And then photographs and illustrations. Of course, we thank Kara Gibson for her amazing line drawings. And here we go, almost 100 photographers who submitted pictures, and more than 70 whose photos we used in the book. And of course, the folks at the Royal BC Museum staff who helped us put it all together. So I think one of the things that we learned from the book, maybe more than anything else, is that mycology, study of fungi, is never a solo effort, and it really takes a community to raise a book. Here is a community of mycologists, students of fungi from 8 years ago at Whistler Fungus Among Us, where Chem and I will both be heading off to tomorrow to join the annual celebrations up there. And that's all that we have for tonight's presentation, but we would love to continue the discussion or answer any questions that people have about tonight's presentation. Thanks, Stephanie.
We might mention too at the end here, this year a new opportunity came up to sort of take the content of the book and put it into another format. The museum decided to build a traveling exhibit. They have several traveling exhibits that they lease out to various places. They have 70 different sites within BC that take these traveling exhibits. So they asked us to put together a traveling exhibit based on this book. and it is just now being finished. It contains 16 panels with some of our pictures, a lot of text, and it also contains some exhibit boxes. And the exhibit boxes, they are making models of edible mushrooms in BC that people can look at.